I want to tell you about a man I once knew. Let's call him David. David was the person everyone called at 2 a.m., the one who dropped everything when someone needed help. His phone was always on, his door always open, his energy always available. People loved David, or so he thought. One day David got sick. Not seriously, just enough that he couldn't be there for everyone for 2 weeks. And something strange happened. The calls stopped. The messages dried up. When he recovered and reached out, people were busy, suddenly unavailable. It was as if his existence only mattered when he was useful. Carl Jung once treated a patient who had a similar awakening. She came to him exhausted, depleted, wondering why she felt invisible despite being surrounded by people. Jung told her something that changed her life. You are not suffering from giving too much. You are suffering from giving to those who only know how to take. That's the trap. You think you're building connections, but you're actually building dependencies. And dependencies aren't relationships, they're transactions. The moment you stop providing, the transaction ends. Here's what nobody tells you about being always available. You're not being kind. You're being convenient. And there's a massive difference. Jung discovered through his work with patients that the human psyche operates on what he called libido, not in the sexual sense, but as psychic energy. This energy is finite. Every interaction, every emotional labor, every time you say yes when you mean no, you're making a withdrawal from this account. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung noticed that his patients who were most drained weren't necessarily doing more than others. They were doing things that violated their inner truth. A patient who spent an hour with someone they genuinely cared about would leave energized. The same patient spending 10 minutes with an emotional vampire would leave destroyed. The energy drain isn't about the time invested. It's about the authenticity deficit. Every time you betray yourself to please someone else, you create what Jung called a complex, a fragmented part of your psyche that splits off and begins to sabotage you from within. Think about the last time you agreed to something you didn't want to do. Remember that feeling in your stomach? That wasn't anxiety. That was your authentic self screaming at you to stop. But you didn't listen. And what happened? You probably did the thing and it drained you more than it should have. Not because the task was hard, but because you were fighting yourself the entire time. This is the real cost of constant availability. You become a stranger to yourself. Let me tell you how the game works. There are people in your life right now who have mapped your emotional responses. They know exactly which buttons to push. They don't do this consciously, most of them. It's an unconscious survival mechanism. Jung called this projexy, their own shadow, their own neediness, their own manipulative tendencies. So they project these onto the world and then interact with their projections. When someone treats you like an emotional ATM, they're not seeing you. They're seeing their own internal need for constant validation reflected back at them. But you enable this by being predictable. Every time you respond immediately, every time you rush to fix their problems, every time you absorb their anxiety, you're training them. You're teaching them that you're the solution to their internal void. And here's the cruelest part. The more you give, the less they value it. Jung observed this in families, friendships, even in his own therapeutic relationships. He wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." You've been trying to be the universal shoe, fitting yourself into everyone's needs. But in doing so, you've become shapeless. You've lost your contours, your edges, your distinct form. And now people walk all over you because you've made yourself into a doormat trying to be accommodating. There's a concept in Jungian psychology called the persona, the mask you wear to be accepted by society. You've built your persona around availability. You've made it your identity. I'm the reliable one. I'm the helper. I'm the one who's always there. But Jung warned about over-identifying with the persona. He said when you do this, you create what he called persona inflation. You become so attached to the mask that you forget there's a real person underneath. And that real person? They're suffocating. I'll tell you exactly when this happened to you. Think back. There was probably a moment in your childhood when you learned that love was conditional. Maybe you got attention when you helped, when you were good, when you made things easier for others. And in that moment, a contract was written in your unconscious. I am valuable when I am useful. This is the wound. And every time you drop everything for someone, every time you sacrifice your peace for someone else's comfort, you're not being generous. You're trying to prove you deserve to exist. Jung spent years helping patients excavate these unconscious contracts. He'd ask them, who benefits from your exhaustion? And the answer was never the patient. It was always some internalized parent, some childhood fear of abandonment, some desperate need to be seen as indispensable. Now let me tell you what happened to David. After that illness, after seeing how quickly he became invisible, something broke in him. Not in a destructive way. Something broke open. He made a decision. He started saying no. Not aggressively, just calmly. I can't tonight. I need to think about that. That doesn't work for me. He stopped responding to messages immediately. He let his phone stay on silent. He cancelled plans when he needed rest. And the reaction was immediate and revealing. Some people got angry. They accused him of changing, of becoming selfish, of abandoning them. These were the people who had been using him. Their anger wasn't about his absence. It was about losing their emotional crutch. But others, a smaller group, responded differently. They said, I respect that. They said, take your time. These were the people who had actually valued him, not just his utility. Jung described this as the process of individuation, becoming who you actually are rather than who others need you to be. And it's terrifying because it means some people will reject you. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. The people who reject your authentic self were never truly with you in the first place. They were with your mask, your persona, your usefulness. Individuation requires you to disappoint people. It requires you to become incomprehensible to those who only knew your surface. It requires you to be misunderstood. And this is where most people turn back. They feel the discomfort of disappointing someone, and they immediately apologize, explain, justify. But Jung would ask, why do you owe anyone an explanation for protecting yourself? Silence. Not the silence of passive aggression or avoidance. Conscious, deliberate, powerful silence. Jung understood something profound about silence. He wrote, your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's the presence of self-reflection. When you stop immediately reacting, when you create space between stimulus and response, you give yourself the chance to hear your own truth. I want you to try something. The next time someone asks something of you, instead of immediately answering, take 3 breaths. Just 3. In those breaths, ask yourself, do I actually want to do this, or am I afraid of what happens if I say no? That pause is revolutionary, because in that space you're no longer a puppet. You're no longer reacting from your conditioning. You're choosing. Jung had a patient who was terrified of disappointing her mother. Every phone call from her mother would send her into panic, and she'd immediately agree to whatever was asked. Jung gave her one instruction: wait 24 hours before responding to any request. At first, the patient thought this was impossible. She'd pace, she'd feel guilty, she'd catastrophize. But something strange happened. After the 24 hours, the urgency disappeared. She could suddenly see clearly that most requests weren't urgent at all. They were just her mother's anxiety being transferred to her. The silence broke the spell. When you stop being immediately available, you force people to sit with their own emotions. And this is uncomfortable for them because they've outsourced their emotional regulation to you. But it's not your job to manage other people's feelings. Jung was clear about this. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. Your silence is a statement. It says, I am choosing me. Here's something that might be hard to hear. Your constant availability might not be as altruistic as you think. Jung spent a lot of time exploring the shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. And one of the most common shadows he found in helpers was a hidden superiority complex. By always being the one who gives, who helps, who's available, you get to be the strong one. You get to be needed. You get to feel indispensable. But underneath that, there's often a fear. If I'm not needed, will I be wanted? This is the shadow bargain. You give and give, not just from generosity, but from a fear that without your usefulness, you have no value. And people unconsciously sense this. They sense that your helping comes with invisible strings attached, an unspoken expectation that they'll owe you, that they'll validate your worth. Jung would say this isn't true compassion. True compassion comes from wholeness, not from woundedness. When you help from a place of exhaustion, resentment, or need for validation, you're not really helping. You're using the other person to fill your own void. The path forward isn't to stop caring. It's to care from a place of overflow, not depletion. To give because you genuinely want to, not because you're terrified of what it means if you don't. David learned something after 6 months of practicing unavailability. He learned that the loneliness he feared wasn't loneliness at all. It was solitude, and solitude is where you meet yourself. Jung wrote extensively about the necessity of solitude in the individuation process. He said we must descend into ourselves, face our own darkness, our own needs, our own truths. And this can't be done in the constant noise of other people's demands. In solitude, David started asking different questions. Not, what do they need from me, but what do I need? Not, how can I fix this, but is this mine to fix? Not, will they still like me, but do I like who I'm becoming? These questions led him somewhere unexpected. He realized he'd spent so much energy being available to others that he'd become unavailable to himself. He didn't know what he enjoyed anymore. He didn't know what his boundaries were. He didn't even know what peace felt like because he'd been in a state of chronic emergency response for years. Jung called this enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. David's excessive availability had turned into a form of self-abandonment. His selflessness had become self-destruction. The reconstruction began when he started treating himself like someone he was responsible for helping. Jung often asked his patients, "Would you treat a friend the way you treat yourself?" The answer was always no. So David started small. He started honoring his own needs with the same urgency he'd given to others. He started protecting his energy the way he'd protected others' feelings. He started showing up for himself. And here's what nobody tells you about this process. It's not comfortable. You'll feel selfish. You'll feel guilty. Old voices will scream at you that you're being cruel, that you're letting people down, that you're not who you used to be. Good. You're not supposed to be who you used to be. That version of you was unsustainable. If something in this message has stirred something in you, if you've recognized yourself in David's story or felt that knot in your stomach when I talked about the hidden cost of availability, I want you to do something. Write in the comments, "I choose me, not for me, for you." Let it be a declaration, a line in the sand, a moment you can look back on and say, that's when it started to change. Jung believed that the psyche has an innate drive toward wholeness. Even when you're fragmented, depleted, lost in the maze of other people's needs, there's a part of you that knows the way back. He called this the self with a capital S, the organizing principle of the psyche. Your exhaustion, your resentment, your feeling of being used, these aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that your self is trying to get your attention. It's saying, this isn't aligned, this isn't authentic, this isn't sustainable. The path back to wholeness requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold two opposites in tension until a new way emerges. You've been living in one extreme, total availability. The temptation now might be to swing to the other extreme, total withdrawal, cynicism, closing yourself off completely. But the transcendent function asks you to find the middle path, to be available but selectively, to give but from overflow, to help but not at the cost of yourself, to love others but not more than you love yourself. This is the nuanced art of boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls. They're not about punishing others or protecting yourself from connection. They're about honoring your own finite energy and being intentional about where it goes. David learned to ask himself one question before saying yes to anything. Will this nourish me or deplete me? Not, is this person deserving? Or, will they be upset if I say no? But simply, will this nourish or deplete? And he learned that depletion comes in many forms. Sometimes it's obvious, a toxic person who drains your energy. But sometimes it's subtle. It's saying yes to things that don't align with your values, maintaining relationships out of obligation rather than genuine connection. It's staying busy to avoid facing yourself. There's a concept in Jungian psychology called the confrontation with the shadow. At some point in the individuation process, you have to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. For people who are chronically available, the shadow is often the part of you that wants to say no, that wants to be selfish, that wants to put yourself first. You've been taught that this part is bad. That selfishness is the ultimate sin. But Jung would say, what you resist persists and grows stronger. By denying your own needs, by refusing to honor your own boundaries, you don't eliminate selfishness. You just drive it underground where it becomes resentment, passive aggression, burnout. The sacred no is about integration. It's about acknowledging that you have needs, limits, preferences, and that honoring these doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a whole person. When David started saying no, he noticed something fascinating. The quality of his yeses changed. Before, his yes was automatic, obligatory, tinged with resentment. Now, when he said yes, it was genuine. It was from a place of actual desire to help, not fear of disappointing. And people felt the difference. His relationships became more authentic because they were based on truth rather than transaction. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but you can't become who you truly are while you're busy being who everyone else needs you to be." Here's the paradox. When you stop being constantly available, you become more valuable, not less. Jung understood this through the alchemical principle of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. Sometimes you have to break down the old form before the new form can emerge. Your old pattern of constant availability has to dissolve before your authentic presence can coagulate. When you become scarce, when you become selective, when you become unavailable for nonsense, something shifts in how people relate to you. The ones who only wanted your utility will fade away, and the ones who value your essence will lean in. This isn't manipulation. This isn't playing games. This is natural selection of relationships. You're simply allowing the truth of each relationship to reveal itself. David told me something profound after a year of this new way of being. He said, "I used to have 100 surface-level connections and feel completely alone. Now I have 5 deep connections and feel completely held." The alchemy of absence is that it creates space for presence, real presence. The kind where you're not depleted, not resentful, not performing. You're just there fully with people who deserve your full presence. Jung's ultimate goal for his patients wasn't happiness. It wasn't success. It was what he called individuation, becoming undivided within yourself. And that requires you to integrate all the parts you've been rejecting. The part that's tired, the part that wants to say no, the part that doesn't want to help, the part that needs rest, the part that wants to be alone, the part that craves depth over breadth, the part that's angry about being used. These aren't bad parts. They're true parts. And when you keep rejecting them to maintain your persona of constant availability, you create what Jung called neurosis, a split between who you are and who you're pretending to be. Healing isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming an integrated person. It's about bringing all of yourself to the table, even the parts that aren't always convenient for others. David's journey didn't end with him becoming cold or isolated. It ended with him becoming real. He still helps people. He's still generous. He's still kind. But now it comes from choice, not compulsion. From wholeness, not woundedness. from overflow, not depletion. And the people in his life now? They're not there because he's useful. They're there because he's him. This is the moment. Right now, reading this, you're at a crossroads. You can close this and go back to the old pattern, continuing to give yourself away piece by piece until there's nothing left. Or you can make a different choice. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." What do you choose? Choose to protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Choose to say no without guilt because your peace matters. Choose to disappoint people who only valued your compliance, because their disappointment is not your responsibility. Choose to be unavailable for anything that costs you yourself. This isn't about being cruel. It's about being real. It's about honoring the finite nature of your energy and being intentional about where it goes. It's about understanding that you can't pour from an empty cup, but more importantly, you shouldn't have to drain yourself to be worthy of love. The path of individuation is lonely at times. Jung never promised otherwise, but it's the only path to genuine peace, the only path to authentic connection, the only path to becoming who you actually are. David's story doesn't end with a fairy tale. He didn't find a perfect community or become some enlightened guru. He just became more himself. In becoming more himself, he found something more valuable than being universally liked. He found self-respect. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow. Not after you finish reading this. Right now. Think of one relationship or pattern where you've been overgiving. One place where you've been too available, too accommodating, too willing to sacrifice yourself. And make one small change. Maybe it's not responding immediately to texts. Maybe it's saying, "I need to think about that," instead of automatic yes. Maybe it's canceling a commitment that drains you. One change. That's all. Because individuation doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in 1,000 small choices to honor yourself, to choose your peace, to protect your energy, to become unavailable for anything that costs you your soul. And when you do this, when you start choosing yourself, something will shift. The right people will understand. The wrong people will leave. And slowly, quietly, you'll start to feel something you haven't felt in years. Whole. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen in these words, I'd be grateful if you'd hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a way of saying, I see this truth too. And maybe in your seeing it, someone else will find the courage to see it in themselves. The work of becoming whole is the most important work you'll ever do. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you real. And in a world full of masks and performances and people pleasers, being real is the most radical thing you can do. Welcome to the beginning of your individuation.